Welcome to Anomacast, episode 3. Pete and I now take on the challenge of the project Takeover Blues. Wah, 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 wah. This episode, we're talking about maintaining the balance, keeping an equal footing. In summary, we are trying to understand how to manage client relations so that the relationship remains equitable. Now, Pete, why don't you start off with your wonderful British analogy of.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. When I was employed by an employer, I had a friend who was a Welshman, big chap, bulky, and he played rugby, a bit like American football. Tough, physical game, chase the ball, score points. One of the moves in rugby is a line out where your two teams line up in one row and alongside each other. So there's two rows, their team and your team. And the ball is thrown along the row and everybody goes up, jumps high, and it's a bid for possession of the ball. Now, this lad was told by his coach when he first did his first big competition, when he goes up for the line out, if the guy alongside him on the other side punches him hard in the kidneys, makes him wince, when he's going up for the ball, what he's got to do is line up beside that guy at the next line out, and when they go up for the ball, whether they're anywhere near the ball or not, give him that dig in the kidneys harder back. Now, that might sound a bit unchristian. It might sound like revenge, but it's not revenge. No, it's a statement. It's a statement that you are not going to be cowed. It's a statement that you're as good as that guy. It's a statement that he can't get away with that sort of behaviour. It establishes a footing, establishes the ambience between you and him for the game, that he is not able to get one over on you. If you don't bash him in the kidneys, dig him in the kidneys like he did you, every time you go up, you will get one. And it won't stop, even if you start digging after a few line-outs. Now, we apply this to clients and developers. Matt, now you coming in here now and talk a bit about zero sum, because zero sum comes in nicely here in relation to that story.
In the zero sum game, it says that there always has to be a winner and a loser, and that there never can be a situation in which there are two winners. But I believe reality doesn't really work that way, and that in reality there are the possibility of both sides winning and both sides losing. If we want to talk game theory for a second, the zero sum game is a term from game theory. So there's another scenario in game theory called the prisoner's dilemma. And it fits, I believe, reality more than the zero sum game. And I think it fits it quite well. Just really quick, because I don't want to spend the whole time talking about game theory. You have two criminals that are in conspiracy to rob a store. They're caught entering the store, and then they're separated and interrogated separately. The investigators determined to turn to turn them against one another, and so they offer an amnesty or a reduced sentence to each one of them if they will testify against the other. And in experimental play of this game, it's found that most human beings will betray their ally. But if you look at the mathematics of game theory, you find that the best option is for both of you to hold your peace and not testify against the other. To support one another, to back one another up. And that way, the game ends with a higher score. You both win. But the problem is the near-term gain or the fear of losing overrides each person, and he ends up betraying his companion, his conspirator. I think that describes not only projects, but life in general. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, you see, the first instance, the rugby instance, shows you how to manage unequal footings, unequal relationships. That as soon as there's any inequality sort of tried to be imposed on you, you have to come back with an equal and opposite, almost a Newtonian reaction. The second example of the zero-sum game and the guys who are criminals, it shows that if you and your client stick together and work together, you will both win. There is no ultimate conflict between you, even though your agendas are very different. Like the client will have probably a sales agenda, a deadline agenda,
yes,
testing, etc., whereas your agenda is to do the work as best you can, and if it goes over a bit, you're not too bothered about that. You're not too bothered about sales. It's not your baby. But overarching that, the zero-sum game shows that there is at the bottom a very general and very strong common interest for you both to work together.
Yes. Oh, and I want to add that, and I want to say that Anomacast is not really a Christian program. It strives to embrace all communities and all. Well, perhaps not the nihilists out there. Sorry to the nihilists, but I don't really have much love for you. We will bring up some Christian themes here because, well, we grew up in Christian communities and we both consider ourselves Christians. So I'm not going to apologize for that. I'll just say it. And I would say that there is another concept in the Old Testament which sounds strikingly like what we're saying, and that's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, lex talionis. But I think a lot of people misunderstand lex talionis. As I understand lex talionis, is that it's not a matter of punishment. It's a matter of compensation. It's a matter of restitution. In a crime, you cannot be paid back any more than what you lost. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah. Yes, this is the idea of giving as good as you got, as we call it in the UK. You see, the idea of giving as good as you got, an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, it's like, if you like, a balance, the scales of justice. But it sounds harsh and it sounds revengeful, maybe. Only it's the only thing available that will establish a respect, will establish one's own integrity, which, unless it is established, there will be repercussions not only for you in your relationship with the client, if he tries to become heavy and domineering. There won't be just the sleepless nights for you, dealing with the anxiety and the oppression, but that will feed into the work you do.
Yes.
It may not do it consciously, but it will do it unconsciously. You're more liable to mistakes. You're more up for time consuming. You're more up for carelessnesses, even if it's unconscious. I mean, it does happen sometimes that people deliberately sabotage work, but I don't think that's advisable. but
No.
even unconsciously, it will feed into your actual software development work.
Oh yeah, it can do nothing but affect the way you work. The human mind is well too influenced by its environment. I mean, that's what we are. We're a combination of how we interact with our environment. So
Yeah.
I don't see
Yeah.
how you can escape, how anyone can escape. The project will always suffer if you're not working together on it. If there's strife and division, the project's going to suffer for it, and it's going to cause more. Well, it this is a cliche, but it's going to snowball.
Yeah, and I think also, if you were going to make a colleague, a real colleague, even a friend out of whoever it is who's your client, if it's going to develop into a friendship at all, which sometimes it does, it can only develop as a real friendship, a true friendship, on an equitable footing. It can't develop in a sort of master servant or a king
Right.
and subject relationship. There will always be, there's a piece in there's a piece in Shakespeare's The Tempest about a really silly, stupid, foolish courtier called Stefano, and even the brute at the bottom of the food chain, Caliban, who's the half monster, half man, who's at the bottom of the food chain in the social order. When he meets Stefano, he says to his friend Trinculo, "I could find it in my heart to beat him because he's such a fool." And there is that in us. There is that element in us that if we start dominating someone and someone caves in and becomes our flunky, our lapdog, we can find it in our heart to beat him, because that's just a fallen aspect of human nature, I think.
We find him contemptible.
Indeed, yeah.
Right? Yeah, because we might say in our minds, I would never allow myself to be treated that way. Even if it's subconscious.
Yeah, and you've got to look at your psychological health too. Is it any good even for the other chap to get away with domineering?
No.
Psychologically, is it good for his health?
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's absolutely not good for his health. It's not good for your health either, because, and I know that there are some people, well, not some people, I know that this is a very disputed thing that I'm about to talk about, but the effects of hierarchy on human psychology is that we tend to secrete more testosterone. Now, I recognize that there are studies that contradict this, but I'll just go on this because I know inherently that testosterone isn't just a male hormone. It exists in both genders.
Yeah. The idea of mental health too. We're creatures of habit, whether we believe we are or not. We build up. We reinforce our habits by doing them, and if you get into one mode of relationship with another person, you'll click into that mode every time you meet that person. And as I say,
who's boss? It's a matter of who's doing their part, who's doing their job. If they're not doing their job, then the whole thing suffers.
It's just a bit like acting, and fitting into roles.
Yes.
If you've got an unequal relationship with someone, it's sort of, whether you're on the top of the relationship or underneath it, on the bottom of it, you're sort of messing with your mind, because you're giving it. Well, the person on top is giving it freedoms which encourage. Well, it sounds a bit. This all may sound. I'm going to come on to paternalism and moralism in a minute, because it's not maternalism and moralism. All this, it's practical application. It gives your mind, by being given a free hand to be dominant, it gives your mind all sorts of unhealthy and unhelpful ideas to carry out in society generally, and this is for practical living. As I say, it's not about moral outrage. It's not about looking after someone and making sure they behave correctly. It's a matter about living free, living equitably, getting the work done well, making friends, being able to speak your mind, being able to take criticism, all those things come into it, and that is what makes life free. And if freedom is perhaps the thing without which not life becomes a chore, I think.
I would agree. I think the ultimate goal of any human being is to be free. I think we often confuse what we want in that freedom. We don't understand what real freedom is. And in a project, freedom isn't holding all the keys. I've found that the guy who holds all the keys is the least free of everyone present. He's the one who has to defend those keys and keep control of the project. And you know, why would you want to have to keep control of something if you want to participate in it?
That's right. That's right. If you're domineering over someone else in a relationship, say as a client over a developer, you automatically, because you've taken that dominant role, you automatically become responsible for things that are actually in the ambit of the developer and not yourself. But you take them on because you take him as it were in a master-slave relationship, and in the sense that the master owns the slave, what the slave does, the master is punished for, and that is that may not be statute law, but that's how it pans out. That's how it pans out in reality. That's the psychological law. That's the de facto law of how it works out. For instance, you might get because you're trying to be forceful.
Oh, there he's back. Okay.
Because you're trying to be forceful, you might actually overstep the mark and advise or even compel your developer to do something in such a way, because you can do it, because you can force him to do it, because he is malleable and pliable. And even against his better knowledge, the developer might do it. And of course, it may not be the best thing. And that's just a simple example of how it practically pans out, this sort of thing. Because if a person's not able to stand up when they think that something's going wrong and put their hand up and say, it's going wrong, we need to do this, not that. And they're cowed into doing that. And you're not the expert, but the developer is. You can see that things can go wrong. You know, it can fall to pieces quite easily. As Matthew was saying, we are Christians, Matthew and I, and just for Christians, just a little bit, if you're worried about, say, turning the other cheek when someone digs you in the ribs or in the kidneys going up for the ball, or someone sort of starts lording it over you and you feel as though you've got to tolerate it because you were told to love your enemies and do good to those that hate you. Just want to say a few words to people who feel a pang of conscience about giving, as it were, retribution. They might feel it's revenge rather than retribution. The fact is, this is based on an idea that Christ himself, let me be a bit candid here and use words which I wouldn't use about Christ, but it's the attitude that people sometimes have about Christ, is that he was a wimp. He was what do you call it? Was a sort of a weak, sort of gentle Jesus, sort of sloppy, soppy, almost sentimental vision of Jesus. But there's plenty of examples of him using this sort of idea that we're talking about. In fact, it is a Christian idea that we're talking about, because he was a teacher. He was called the teacher, and this is the role, not as a dominant, not dominant as a teacher, but because everybody is free to take or leave what Christ says. That's the essence of Christ's teaching, that you are free to reject him. There's no point in being compulsory made to follow him. Anyway, there's plenty of examples in the New Testament Gospels of him being tough. And Matt, would you like to give a few?
Well, I think the ones that you have set out here are the cleansing of the temple, which some people view as a violent act. But again, I like to say to my audience that I'm Christian, but I have a very different perspective on reading the Bible than the average Christian. And I try to read every piece of literature in its context. And Jesus's behavior in the story of the cleansing of the temple is very consistent with the ethos of his time. So it was an example of his boldness and his strength and his faith. Whenever he would talk to the religious leaders of his day, which was the people he condemned, the Pharisees, for instance, the Sadducees, he would withstand them for their hypocrisy. Whenever he rebuked Peter, one of his leading disciples, at the end of his life, he rebukes one of his closest people for not being truly understanding, being ignorant of what the true mission was. Whenever he rebukes, you say Simon here in the notes, Pete, but is that one gospel says Simon, another one says Judas, right?
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Temptations in the wilderness. You have the story of the temptations in the wilderness, and he rebukes against Satan in that story. He doesn't cower or kowtow to the temptations, which, ironically, not ironically, maybe very serendipitously, the story of the temptation in the wilderness is a very good allegory to the programmer and the developer, because he's dealing with his client, who's the devil, and right. And the devil is offering him all of these wonderful things if he'll just, bow down and worship him. And I must admit that I've met more than my fair share of clients that were basically like Satan in that story. In fact, if you work out on the freelance sites, you'll see that. If you'll do a good job, I'll promise you much more work in the future. But the rest of the message is you have to kowtow to whatever it is that they say you're supposed to do. And incidentally, for young developers, that means that if something goes wrong, he's going to hang it on you. Okay. I
think all these things, sorry, Matt, I think all these examples you've given is examples that very much so Jesus Christ was his own man. Nobody told him what to do. And he didn't force anybody to do anything. He knew what he was about. He had a clear focus of what he wanted to do, and why he came, and what he was charged to do. And he followed it through. He had his struggles, the agony in the garden, and other times in which he talks about, take this cup from me, but not my will, but yours. So he's a tough guy, and he's an individual, and everybody's got a right to be an individual. And the only way to be individual is sometimes in our society where there's others wanting to be individuals, but more individuals above and beyond others and over others. The only way to retain your individuality is to be a bit tough. And I think it's John Lennon who said, "You got to push, you got to shove, you got to be somebody." Um, well, I don't care about being somebody so much, but you have got to push and shove a little bit when somebody's pushing and shoving you. That's basically what it is, and you'll feel better for it. Just like when you might have a fight or a quarrel with your wife or your husband, and after the quarrel, the air's cleared, and you feel you settle down, you lose your anger, you lose the sort of heat of the moment, and you make up, and things are better. The air's been cleared. You're tender about one another again, and obviously you're not going to be sort of in a love relationship with your client, but that sort of clearing of the air, purging of the demons, and setting things right. It needs to be done every now and again, and even with clients and developers, there is a way of falling out with people which is within a bigger context, a bigger loyalty, where you're just expressing the truth to one another, what you feel is the truth to one another, but beyond that, as a relationship, you're still respecting one another, still your own people, and you're not at each other's throats, literally. You're more, as it were, trying to even iron out disputes, disagreements.
Okay, cool. I mean, we've got more stuff that we can talk about here. Why don't we go ahead and talk about the turn the other cheek idea?
Oh, yeah. This ties into the gentle Jesus, soft touch Jesus, the one who you see too often on well, a lot of what should we say, images of Jesus, but from people who are not as familiar with the Gospels as they should be, may not be Christians. They see the Christian option as almost despicable. I know this because I've been there before I was a Christian. Not really despicable for me, but I know, there's something that if I went to be a Christian, I would be seen as despicable by the people. I would be seen as a milksop, a weakling, somebody who needs a crutch, somebody who needs a support, a Zimmer frame of Jesus to get around in life. And that's a common belief, a common fear that prevents people from opening their Bibles and seeing and opening their eyes and seeing beyond that,
Yes. Yeah. So turning the other cheek would be used to excuse abuse or to allow it, but I don't think that was the idea of turning the other cheek. Turning the other cheek was that of self-control, which was the very essence of meekness. It was, I believe, seeking to find resolution, but it was in no way accepting abuse. It was not seeking vengeance either. And I know, Pete, you and I have talked at length about measuring the difference between seeking vengeance, punishing someone, and seeking restitution. But there is a fine line between the two. But turning the cheek embodies that navigation of that fine line between vengeance and restitution and peace and abuse. I think that it's more complex and nuanced than, even most Christians understand. In fact, I think most Christians have an overly simplistic understanding of how to deal with people. I'm not going to beat up on the Christians only. I'll beat up on acquaintances of mine that are, say, Randians, followers of Ayn Rand. I think that they have an overly simplistic view of humanity. And I like some of the things that they have to say, but whenever it starts talking about dealing with people, I think that they're naive and misinformed. But loving your enemies which is the next thing on our list, is a beseeching to try to make the project succeed. I want to make this succeed. I want this to work. And you have to be able to work with people that you might not like all that much.
Yeah. There's several things there. Even if you're working with, the client doesn't like you much, you don't like the client much, you can still have a working relationship. You can still have, you might have to keep some distance, keep it a little bit more formal than you would for someone who's a bit more personable or who thinks you're a bit more personable. But you can adjust that. It goes back to, pardon me, just a moment, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. It goes back to Aristotelian, Aristotle's idea in his ethics of temperance being the ultimate virtue, all things in moderation. And this includes your space, the space you allow yourself in human relations with other people, the space they allow to you, impositions and not putting an imposition on someone, recognizing when an imposition is being put on you. It's judgment, it's personal judgment, of course, and sometimes we go awry with that. But it's trying to hold this in your mind, this idea of not just all things in moderation, but consideration for others, that they have a life. They have space. They have personal problems. They need listening to as well, which is the, we say that all those things add up and feed into your own personal judgment and help you make the right decisions. Help you try to make the right decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we sound a bit educational here, and it might sound, as I said before, I want to repeat this, it might sound a bit sort of theoretical, it might sound a bit sort of pie in the sky, but you got to remember that all this that we've talked about, it has bearing on everyday life, on conduct, on behaviour, on what quality of life you allow your client allows you, you allow to yourself what your client allows to himself. Certainly it's better to be, let's say, to curb one's dominance or to boost one's meekness so as to make an equitable and enduring relationship with one another, and both of you are happier. Both of you are happier. Both of you are more willing to work with one another. Both of you, at their work, at your separate tasks, feel more motivated, more composed, more at ease, more ready to take it on. So it's about practical application. It's not about, it's not abstract shoulds and oughts.
Well, I think it's also self-investigation. You have to have some ideas in your head before you can figure out what you want or what you think it should be like. And if you don't spend time thinking about these things, you'll probably spend your life miserable because you really don't know what you want. Even if you think you have that. Like, for instance, the person who runs an organization thinking that they won't ever have to deal with their staff, that they somehow delegate their staff and they never have to talk to them. Well, that isn't going to happen. You might wish it, but it isn't going to happen. And if you go into the relationship with that idea, you will explore it and you will discover fairly quickly that it won't happen. Then you might ask yourself, what's the optimum I can get? What's the least amount of engagement I can have? And I think it is possible to maximize your engagement to have something outside of your business life, outside of this professional life, because life is definitely not just your profession. But in a project, if you're not interacting with people regularly, then it's going to fail. It's guaranteed it's going to fail. And or if you interact with them in a fashion that is disrespectful or oppressive, it's going to fail. I'm shocked at how it seems like even the smallest projects can be run like you're running a military operation, and that if it fails, that millions of people are going to die in a hideous nuclear death. I mean, there's no perspective.
You're put against the wall and face a firing squad.
Right. It's almost like it's that severe. And there's money involved. People tend to think it's the end of the world. And that's not to say that a developer shouldn't respect his client's need to make money. Well, because if his client's not making money, he can't pay the developer.
Yeah.
But it's reciprocal in that the client has to understand that the developer not only has monetary needs, he has psychological, emotional needs. And creating this hostile environment in which he's blamed for everything, or he's constantly under suspicion for whatever he might have done, is definitely not going to make the money worth that much.
I just want to come in, Matt, if I may, and say,
Sure.
which we haven't really covered yet, about the technical knowledge of the developer, deferring to experts. Yes, you defer to experts and expert knowledge only once expert knowledge has been established in your estimation, of course, that not in oneself, but in the person you're believing is an expert. And you do defer to expert knowledge. You should defer to expert knowledge, but only within the ambit, the sphere of that expert knowledge. There's a little story about Plato tells about Socrates, how he was told by the Delphic oracle he was the wisest person in Athens, in Greece, I think, and he didn't believe it, and he went about trying to disprove it, and he went around to the politicians, and he talked to them, and he decided that they were just all hot air and that he couldn't get any answers from them. And he went to other places, and eventually he went to the tradesmen, and he found that the tradesmen, the shoemakers, the millers, the tailors, this sort of people, plumbers and what have you, and he said they did know, they had expert knowledge in their field. He said that, but like the politicians, like the rest of us, they thought because they had expert knowledge in their field, they were entitled to talk, be authoritative about morals, about behaviour, about virtue, as he calls it, about what is the good life. They all thought they knew this, and Socrates came to the conclusion that once he talked to them and about this belief that they had, that they knew all about this, he came to the conclusion that the Delphic oracle was right, but he was wisest because he realised he knew nothing, whereas the others thought they knew something, and that of course applies here, that we know, as Matthew, as a developer, he knows about code, servers, etc., websites, building them, design. He knows that, and you can go to him and you can find out good knowledge about that. Only we don't put ourselves up here as moral arbiters. We don't put ourselves up here as knowing what virtue is. Our guide, in fact, is Jesus Christ. I mean, and that's blunt and open from me. He's our guide. We're not forced to follow him. We follow him because we believe in him. And it's the light we've got, the light given by the Gospels, and this is what we're trying to follow here. You don't have to take it. You can leave it if you like. It's always a choice. There's no responsibility. There's no value without giving people choice.
That's right. The best relationships are the ones that were in voluntarily.
Yes, indeed. I, as a young lad, many of my friends went to school with or grew up with or went into the army. It was an easy option then, in the sense that you did 2 years with an option for more. And it was a way to see the world, a way to learn a trade, a way to get a driving license without having to pay driving lessons, all sorts of things. It was, as they say, that your sergeant says to you, I'm your mother and father now, and the army looks after you like that. So it was an easy option for them. But nonetheless, what they didn't understand was that they were going to be told every day what to do. And a good deal of them, who I'd never believed would save up money, saved up their pay and bought themselves out, which you could do in those days. If you paid a sum, you could buy yourself out of the army. And they bought themselves out. And the simple thing was they had everything laid on for them. Meals, clothing, what to do, what to think. Only that last one, not what to think, was too much for them. And they had to come out.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, we said earlier, freedom is possibly, apart from the physical necessities of life, freedom is the one psychological necessity that in the Court of Human Rights, it's one of the, it's a prime inherent right, a human right. And I think in the American Constitution, it's also considered a right given by God. And to take that away from a person, even in a client-developer relationship, which sounds pretty small fry, I suppose, in the state of things, is to that extent to make the person suffering the loss of freedom of the will less human than they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in fact, that's one of the problems of the modern world, that the freedom to think differently is considered a threat. I'm getting a lot of feedback, Pete. Maybe turn down your speaker.
Okay.
Okay. Let me see. Nah, still getting quite a bit.
I don't know why that should be. There's no feedback here. Sorry about that, Matt.
No, well, let me try. I'll try talking again. Yeah, it's better. Still can hear me a little bit, but okay. Anyway, we've still got a few more points here, but we're really running over. We need to wrap the show up.
Okay. Do you want me to wrap it up, Matt? Or are you going to do that?
Well, you go ahead and wrap it up, and I can
right. So,
if I want to.
So we've got a few key concepts here about the relationship between developers and clients, that they should be equitable, that you should be able to speak and say anything that's within reason to one another without fear of reprimand or anger or rebuke. Freedom to criticize, I don't think ad hominem, but criticize actions that you think constructively, that you think will help or need adjusting. So freedom, equitable relationships, and choice, the option to take or leave. Yeah. These perhaps are the key things that make a relationship that would have a chance of developing into friendship, has a chance of lasting, and has a good chance of succeeding better than if you're there and you've got a sort of OCD control freak bug in your mind driving you on to be the person who oversees everything down to the last detail. That won't work. Nobody sees everything. Homer says when two go together, one sees before the other. So there we are. That's the sort of thing we've been talking about. Why it's good for you, good for him or her, the client, good all round for the product, for the final handover, even for more work coming your way, for more work coming to the to the client. It's good all round. Win, 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 win.
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't have to be win-lose. It doesn't have to be lose-lose.
Indeed. So can we leave you with that thought? And
That,
I think we've
yeah.
done enough to at least start some thinking, I hope. Yeah.
And I would hope that people would feel free to make comments on the YouTube channel and subscribe. We're doing this mainly in a simple dialogue form, an informal dialogue form. We're not trying to do it as a formal presentation. Yeah, Anomalous Design does support this podcast, but it's first and foremost a service to the IT community. Okay, well, next week we'll be picking up with our Meta-Anomalies podcast, and I look forward to Pete and I being able to discuss an article from our community portal. So if you want to get in touch with either me or Pete, you can contact us at management@anomalousdesign.com.